Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Okay guys, we're embarking on another huge iceberg here, the Very Disturbing Game Iceberg. I've been wanting to do a horror game iceberg for a while now, and this one caught my eye because it felt like the entries were more personal to the creator, which makes for a more unique iceberg chart in my opinion. After taking a peek at the first couple tiers, I knew I had to do it because not only had I not heard of a lot of these, but some of them are just really weird. So shout out to Otaku Sakura 12 on Reddit for making the iceberg and giving me the okay to cover it. So in this video we'll be going over tier 1, and the entries are in no particular order other than I've saved some of the really dark stuff for the end. And I think that's all I got. Let's not waste any more time here. This is tier 1 of the Very Disturbing Game Iceberg. The Theater. The Theater is actually a creepypasta, but has since been made into an actual game. The game seems like a low-budget PC game that seemingly consists of only one level where the player is in the lobby of a movie theater. The level is simple, with nothing to do or interact with other than some bad movie posters on the walls that are mostly illegible. The only thing that players can do is head into what is assumed to be the actual theater at the end of a long dark hallway. Next to the hallway is the ticket taker, a low-res sprite that simply says, "Thank you, please enjoy the movie." As you proceed into the dark hallway, you'll suddenly restart back at the front of the lobby. And yeah, that's pretty much the whole game. Except, if you do this enough times, some peculiar things start to happen. At one point, the ticket taker will be completely absent, and when you enter the hallway, it doesn't restart. Instead, the player continues forward into the darkness. There's nothing for a few moments before a strange sprite that is described as the ticket taker but with a swirl for a face appears and stands before the player, and a high-pitched and terrifying screech can be heard before you're suddenly back at the start of the game with everything back to normal. There's a few more normal cycles through the hallway now, except for the fact that the swirly-headed man sometimes will appear on the side of the screen, making strange noises. Eventually this culminates in the ticket taker saying something with extremely low-quality audio. Most players believe he's saying, "Never reach the other levels." After this, the game resets once more without the ticket taker and a brick wall now blocking the hallway. If you touch the wall, the game instantly crashes, and that's it. So now everyone's left asking the question, what are these other levels and are they accessible? Outlast. Outlast is a survival horror game that takes place in an abandoned asylum, where the player encounters numerous patients who've been subjected to horrific medical experiments. The game's known for its graphic depictions of violence and gore, including scenes of mutilation and disembowelment. You slowly figure out all the messed up experiments performed on the patients, including involuntary lobotomies, electroconvulsive therapy, and other forms of torture. What makes Outlast stand out is that you often have to use your night vision camcorder in order to see in dark areas, which adds a really creepy layer to all of it, especially when your batteries run out. Until Dawn. Until Dawn's a survival horror game set in a remote mountain lodge where 8 friends are trapped by a mysterious killer. The player's choices shape the story and affect the fate of the characters. Some small action or choice earlier in the game can lead to severe consequences later in the game, including death, which makes for multiple possible endings. The game features several brutal and graphic death scenes, including stabbings, hangings, and mutilations. The Evil Within. The Evil Within follows a detective who's investigating a mass murder at a local hospital, only to be transported to a strange alternate dimension inhabited by creatures known as the Haunted. It's another one of those games like Resident Evil or Silent Hill where the enemies are twisted abominations. For instance, there's one called the Obscura that's a female body with stretched out limbs and a camera for a head, or the Guardian, which is a towering monstrosity made up of the corpses of women murder victims. Fear. Fear revolves around the fictional First Encounter Assault Recon Unit, an elite group in the United States Army tasked with investigating supernatural phenomena. When a private military company's secret research program goes wrong and a dangerous and powerful psychic is unleashed, Fear are called in. The player takes the role of a new recruit who then gets caught up in all of this paranormal shenanigans. The game features a lot of Japanese horror elements, namely this creepy Japanese ghost girl. Gotta love a creepy Japanese ghost girl. It's one of the first games I remember that had action-packed shooter gameplay mixed in with horror, and was sort of a poster child for this type of game before the horror genre started moving more towards a lack of weapons or firearms. And I understand why, because when you're a decked out soldier with RPGs and grenades and machine guns and shit, it just makes you feel less scared. Left 4 Dead. Left 4 Dead is Valve's fan-favorite zombie co-op shooter. The game basically popularized a new genre and has been the inspiration for a lot of other titles that have since come out. The basic idea is that you're playing as a group of survivors who are trying to get from point A to point B while massacring hundreds of zombies along the way. Among the undead are special type mutated zombies. The boomer, spitter, and tank are just a few examples of the twisted body shapes the undead take on. Dreaming Mary. Dreaming Mary is a horror adventure game made using RPG Maker. The game starts as you enter the dream world, which is colorful, cute, and full of talking animals. A humanoid boar named Boris asks you to gather seeds from the other animals in order to go further into the dream with him. So I would recommend playing the game for yourself at this point, but there will be some spoilers ahead because it's hard to explain why this is even a horror game without revealing big spoilers, so you've been warned. Well, if you gather the seeds for Boris, the game will end and credits will roll. It just seems like a typical little fantasy story. However, the game will ask you if you're satisfied with the ending. If you say no, the game will give you a second chance. This happens multiple times as you start uncovering more and more truths about the character, each time taking new knowledge with you as you restart, thus changing the outcome of the dream. Eventually, you travel to an alternate dream world that's dark and bloody. You find that the characters you've met are represented as stuffed animals here. If you travel forward too far, though, you'll encounter a shadow figure that chases you, and if he catches you, oh my god. Yeah, this is one of the creepiest illustrations I've seen in a game like this. So I'm obviously shortening a lot of this up, but through many implications we find out that Boris and the shadow creature are actually representations of Mary's real-life father who's been doing disgusting evil things to Mary. This revelation makes a lot of previous dialogue with Boris much more disturbing. You eventually wake up and find Mary, or Mari, which is her true name, in her room, which she has been locked in by her father. However, using a key that you've attained through the dream world, you can unlock the door and leave, revealing the true ending of the game. Like I said, this is a really brief summary of the game, but I would recommend checking out Pika Spray Yellow's video breakdown of it because he pretty much covers everything in detail. Pony Island. There are a lot of horror games that use the whole haunted game gimmick, but Pony Island is a pretty unique example. The game is fairly meta. You play as someone who is playing an arcade game, Pony Island. The game is actually controlled by Lucifer and literally steals souls. The players found a way to alter the code to the game, however, and does so while progressing through the game and freeing souls that the arcade cabinet has previously taken. It's a really unique idea and executed well. Lucius. Lucius was a game that came out a while back where you essentially play as the son of Satan. The game feels like a heavy homage to The Omen and has you go around essentially killing people in various and creative ways, including setting someone on fire, using a lawnmower to tear apart someone's head, and dropping a hairdryer in a woman's bath. It's a fun little game. Hello? Hell-O? Probably one of the weirdest titles here. Hello, Hell-O is an indie horror game essentially about a strained relationship. It all takes place in one room where there are over 30 endings to the game. Endings are triggered by doing different things and interacting with various objects in the room. With each ending, the room changes slightly and the story progresses. It's chock full of jump scares the whole time. Slenderman. I mean, what can I say about Slenderman? It really is a great example of simple but effective game design, and it's one of the first indie horror games of this type I remember going viral back in the day. After all this time, you'd think it just wouldn't be as scary, but it can still give you a little jolt. Dungeon Nightmares. Dungeon Nightmares was originally a mobile game where every night you have a nightmare that you're attempting to escape a dungeon maze while evil creatures chase you. You have to attain an artifact before you can escape, and every night you survive, the difficulty ramps up. It's nothing special, but the noises and jump scares can still get you. Cry of Fear. Cry of Fear was originally a Half-Life mod before being released as a full game. The game is heavily inspired by Silent Hill and features many really disturbing enemy types that are mostly deformed humans. One enemy, the Drowned, has a baby jump out of its stomach and attack you if you get too close. There's a lot of creepy stuff like that in this one. Sally Face. Sally Face is a very unique indie horror game where you play as Sal, or Sally Face, a boy whose mother was killed right in front of him by a shotgun blast that also disfigures his face, which is why he's wearing the mask. I like his mask. Masks are cool. Anyway, while trying to solve the murder of his mother, Sal modifies his portable game system, the Gear Boy, and uses it to communicate with the dead. This leads to some very disturbing interactions that remind me of The Sixth Sense. It's one of those games that just has an eerie tone throughout, which is always a plus to me, and the art style and story really stand out here. This is definitely one to check out. It's why I love iceberg charts. I mean, I've never heard of this game, and just by doing the research, I could tell I'd be into it. Home Sweet Home. Home Sweet Home is a Thai horror game where you play as a man whose wife goes mysteriously missing. As you track her down, you must avoid an onslaught of ghosts and demons who are all drawn from Thai folklore. Baldi's Basics. Baldi's Basics is a weird one. It's kind of a surreal comedy horror game where the art and style seems to be based off of the type of graphics and fonts you'd see in the 90s and early 2000s educational system. You enter a school and the titular character Baldi begins giving you quizzes. There are multiple rules written on the wall like no running, no eating or drinking, and no fourth wall breaks. Probably the single best moment in the game, which is both hilarious and horrifying, is when you get an answer wrong for the first time for Baldi and the music instantly stops as you see the text, "I hear every door you open." You just start hearing a thwacking sound and you realize it's Baldi with a ruler coming for you. Man, I don't know whether to laugh or scream. It's a truly wacky game, and even though the whole thing is a bit of a goof, it's a pretty original idea. The Binding of Isaac. The Binding of Isaac follows a young boy whose fanatical Christian mother begins hearing the voice of God. She strips him naked, confines him to his bedroom, and accepts a commission to kill him in sacrifice to prove her devotion. Isaac discovers her intentions and manages to escape into the basement, where, still naked, he goes on the run as he fights off nightmares, both physical and mental. The uncle who works for Nintendo. In case you don't know, there's a popular meme, "My uncle works at Nintendo," where someone claims to have some insider information about the company or upcoming games that they got from their uncle. Well, apparently someone took the premise of the meme and made it into an actual game. It's a visual novel that has 5 possible endings, but the basic idea is that you stay over at a friend's house who has an uncle that supposedly works for Nintendo, and he's coming over at midnight. Yeah, basically they turn the uncle into some kind of cosmic horror being that eats children. The game does a good job at maintaining an eerie vibe, considering that the game itself is a joke. Free Ice Cream. Free Ice Cream is a short and sweet game where the whole concept is that a man offers free ice cream to a couple of little girls and then kidnaps them. You play as one of these girls who's currently locked in the basement. Through a series of point-and-click puzzles, you try and escape. The game apparently freaked a lot of people out as kids, and the atmosphere and concept in general is pretty freaky. It's just that the villain, well, he sounds like this. Yeah, not exactly terrifying. Probably the most disturbing part of the game is when you find the killer's secret meat locker, where the other little girl is straight up dead inside. Man, that's brutal. Like I said, it's a short game, and if you're curious, you can play through it in around 10 minutes. Dark Deception. Dark Deception is a pretty cool concept. It's a maze runner where you collect jewels and then escape the level before evil enemies catch you. It's basically a first-person horror Pac-Man, if that makes sense. Besides the addictive gameplay, there's actually some interesting lore here as well, and you can play in VR, which makes the whole thing even more spooky. Penumbra. I feel like Penumbra doesn't get enough love. It's a first-person horror game developed by the same people who made Amnesia, which was really its spiritual successor. It features a lot of mechanics found in Amnesia, such as avoiding enemies rather than attacking, hiding from enemies, and solving puzzles using physics-based gameplay. Essentially, you travel through a mine in Greenland filled with abnormally large and disfigured animals. This game legitimately scared me back in the day, and I had no idea what was coming next with Amnesia. Kanye Quest. So Kanye Quest 3030 on face value does not fit this list. It's a parody game where you play as Kanye to recruit rappers like Pokemon and battle your way to save America in the year 3030. Well, after 2 years of the game being out, people started finding out that it's possibly a recruitment method for a reincarnation cult. Yeah. So if you want a full breakdown on this whole thing, there's several lengthy videos out there going into detail on it, but I'll give you the gist. Basically, there's a secret level in the game accessed by talking to an NPC using the word ascend. After this, the game begins talking to you directly, telling you that you'll now be tested, and if you jump through several hoops, including real-world clues like the Morse code that's hidden in the channel description, you'll eventually be asked if you want to participate further, and the game will actually ask for your street address. Well, that just got really weird. No one who's actually entered the personal information has had anything happen, and there's a reason for that. In 2022, the creator of the game, who went by Phoenix, was revealed to be Clara Hope, an art student who made the game in high school. She revealed that this hidden part of the game was initially going to be a separate project, but then merged it with Kanye Quest. Yeah, we all thought this was a secret cult trying to lure us in through a video game, and Nah, it was a single high school girl. Well, props to her, that's pretty cool that she managed to pull it off, plus make a decent parody game. The Luna game series consists of several entries that are all pretty similar. Typically, you play as a My Little Pony sprite and jump through a very basic level. Only, as the level goes on, the music becomes more eerie, and eventually the game will display some form of screamer. The thing is, you can't end the game in any way other than using the task manager, and in some cases, you might even have to force shut down your PC. It kind of reminds me of Sonic.exe and is probably a fun way to prank friends, but kind of annoying that you could mess up your computer. Misao. Misao was originally a freeware game, although it has been remade and released on Steam. The game follows a class of high school students who get dragged into an alternate dimension by a dead girl, Misao, and the player is tasked with solving Misao's death by finding her scattered body parts throughout the school to perform a ritual and confront her classmates. One of the cool things about the game is how many different ways you can die. The game even catalogs your deaths. I gotta say, that's a great idea. Mad Father. Mad Father is actually a prequel, or at least takes place in the same universe as Misao. The game follows a young girl, Aya, who lives with her single father after her mother's passing some years back. Her father does strange experiments in the basement, and we find out that he's actually a psychopath obsessed with preserving the bodies of the dead by taxidermizing them and keeping them as dolls. Something he's planning to do to Aya. With the help of a mysterious stranger, Ogre, Aya solves puzzles in order to get into her father's lab. Ogre, by the way, is the main connection to Misao, as he's also in that game as Onigawara. The plot itself is both sad and disturbing, and it only gets more disturbing with some implications at the end of the game. Layers of Fear. Layers of Fear is a first-person psychological horror game where you play as a painter who's slowly losing his sanity. As his mind begins to decay, so does his art and the world in which you interact with. You slowly piece together the whole story while playing, and it has some frightening moments along the way. I Have No Mouth and Must Scream. This is one of the darkest short stories ever about an AI. Basically, an AI holds the last remaining humans hostage in a simulation, torturing them for eternity. Besides various forms of torture and violence, one character, Benny, has had his physical appearance altered to be chimp-like, and he has radiation scars all over him. And, spoilers, but the last living human ends up being transformed into, well, I'll just quote it. I am a great soft jelly thing, smoothly rounded with no mouth. Pulsing white holes filled with fog where my eyes used to be, rubbery appendages that were once my arms, bulks rounding down into legless humps of soft, slippery matter. I feel a moist trail when I move. Blotches of diseased, evil gray come and go on my surface as though the light is being beamed from within. Holy shit, that is a bleak ending. So there's a PC adaptation of this short story where you play as each of the different characters in a different disturbing simulation, all attempting to beat the AI. Clock Tower. Clock Tower is an interesting one because it's one of those games that was originally released only in Japan on Super Famicom. So when the sequel came out in America on the PS1, they didn't want to confuse people, so they just called it Clock Tower. But ironically, it did confuse people, mainly me, while researching this game because now there's two games called Clock Tower in America. Screw it, I'll just do them both real quick. So the original Clock Tower game was a point-and-click adventure where you play as Jennifer Simpson soon after she's adopted by the Barrows family along with other orphan girls. After arriving at the Barrows mansion, things go bad very quickly when one of the girls is murdered by a deformed boy wielding a large pair of scissors. He's known as the Scissor Man and is the most common and recurring antagonist in the game. Of course, you find out that the Barrows family is into some weird shit and have a large series of catacombs under the mansion where she finds Dan Barrows, who has turned into a really creepy large purple creature thing that chases her. Talk about frightening. Anyway, after narrowly surviving in the first Clock Tower, Jennifer's back in Clock Tower 2, also known as Clock Tower, where she's been adopted by a nice woman named Helen, who's also a playable character in this game. The sequel mostly focuses on the return of Scissor Man as the main antagonist, this time in glorious PS1 graphics. Honestly, maybe the 16-bit graphics were better. I also just want to note that the only game I ever even saw in this series as a kid was actually the third game. I distinctly remember the box art on the PS2 and always wanted to play it, but probably subconsciously avoided it out of fear. Anyway, what are we talking about here? Oh yeah, Disturbing Game Iceberg, right. Calm Time. Calm Time is a short and disturbing game. It starts with an almost poetic text about a man living alone in a cabin that he sees as a prison. We cut to the game where you're the owner of this cabin as you host some kind of dinner party. You slowly greet all the guests and everything feels pretty calm and casual until a woman in the kitchen asks if you could bring her the knife on the counter. Well, once you grab this knife, you can kill her with it. From there, the guests flee and you can enter the different areas of the house. If you go into the basement, you'll find a victim chained up who's died. This woman comes back as a ghost and haunts you by calling you a murderer. It's actually pretty creepy. So from there you have to find all the hiding guests and kill them while this ghost keeps showing up trying to protect them. Eventually you kill them all, including what seems to be a child, by the way, and the game ends with the same text from the beginning, now having dark context. Lisa the First. It wasn't until I saw this entry that I realized Lisa, the 2014 game, was actually a sequel to this. I've talked about that game on some other Iceberg, I think, but let's just focus on Lisa the First. It's a very depressing game that follows the title character Lisa, who clearly lives a neglected life with her father. She sneaks past him and out of the house to escape, although throughout her journey the image of her father keeps appearing in various ways. Okay, so big spoilers here. If you don't want to know the ending, you can skip ahead about 20 seconds. Well, it's one of those things that's predictable, but you just hope isn't true. It turns out that Lisa's father's been molesting her, and the whole adventure and escape from her house is in her head, a total fabrication as means of escaping the memory of what her father did to her. It's very dark and leaves you feeling just kind of bummed out. You won't tell anyone, right? Speaking of childhood trauma and being bummed out, I played this game for the first time while doing research for this video. It's a very short game and there's really not much gameplay, so I don't mind just explaining the whole thing. Well, the game starts as you assume control of a young girl. We don't know how old exactly, but judging by the height of the camera and the stuffed animals, we can guess single digits. Your mom appears in your room, which is already unsettling because of the way in which she manifests and just the low poly graphics. She mentions that she has to work the night shift, but that your stepdad will be watching you and you should be nice to him. So within the first minute, you start getting an idea of where this is going. Suddenly it's 3 a.m. and your creepy ass stepdad pops into the room saying that you should be friends. You can't do anything, by the way. There's nowhere to run or hide. You're just stuck with this creep, which I guess is the point, and he suddenly appears closer to you, continuing his creepy spiel. And of course he says, you're not going to tell anyone, right? There's a white flash, and you're suddenly older and in a movie theater with a faceless boyfriend. I guess that was just a flashback to your unpleasant childhood. Damn. Well, your boyfriend beckons you to sit with him, and then he says, we could get into trouble if anyone sees us here. Oh God. Suddenly he appears to be, you guessed it, your stepdad, as the room is thrown into chaos. Next, you're in an elevator with a knife and show up at your elderly stepfather's apartment. Yeah, the game just got really dark at this point, as you're given the option of killing him. However, if you do, a ghostly apparition appears of your stepfather who says, we're stuck together forever. It's a messed up game about trauma that really makes you feel helpless, especially in that first scene where you literally can't do anything. It's really disturbing to say the least. The static speaks my name. This might be the darkest on tier 1. It's a short game, so I'm just going to break down the whole thing here for you, although the subject matter is very dark like I said. The static speaks my name starts in a black void. You see a floating gray blob and approach it. The blob reads, Jacob Ernholtz, age 31, method, asphyxiation by hanging. You then wake up in Jacob's apartment not long before he actually offs himself. So the setup is already depressing. At this point, you just complete mundane objectives like going to the bathroom and eating breakfast. You do notice that Jacob seems to have an obsession with a painting of 2 palm trees, and that's when things take a very disturbing turn. You find that Jacob has a secret room in his apartment where a man is kept naked in a cage. The room is full of that same painting of the palm trees. At this point, you realize this is the painter and that Jacob has kidnapped and tortured him. You can even choose to electrocute the painter if you want to. But either way, the game ends as you approach a noose in your closet and do the deed. Now you're back in the void, although you notice several other blobs with different names, ages, and methods. Man, what a strange and dark concept. The idea of entering the last few hours of someone's life before they end it is both creative and just unsettling. I'm honestly not sure how to feel about this one, but it definitely was effective in keeping me engaged and uncomfortable. Okay folks, we did it. That was tier 1. And what can I say? It was a roller coaster ride. Nostalgia, action, mystery, and also just straight up sadness. It has been interesting though, and we've just barely scratched the surface here, so I'm excited to see what's on tier 2. Once again, shout out to Otaku Sakura for making the chart, shout out to Kill Me Katie for the music, and of course Naomi Romero for becoming a patron. If you like what I do here and want to support me, plus get a cool shout out like that, check out my Patreon in the description. There's a behind the scenes video on there right now of me doing some research for an iceberg, and there's going to be some gameplay of me reacting to some of these games on this iceberg for the first time. So I've got a lot of cool stuff over there if you want to check it out. But I do appreciate you guys watching at all, so thank you for everything. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.